Mitch McConnell and other Senate Republicans have been pushing to do away with the estate tax. I'm not talking about what they've already done to the estate tax as a result of the 2017 GOP-led tax cuts for the rich. They want more tax cuts when it comes to specifically the estate tax. So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell joined Senators Charles Grassley and John Thune, members of the Senate Finance Committee, in releasing legislation to permanently repeal the federal estate tax, which conservatives refer to as the death tax. Now they refer to it as the death tax because it all has to do with your inheritance. So for some reason, they've been successful in convincing a pretty large portion of the country to think that when their parents die, they're gonna inherit like an insane amount of money. Most people will not. In fact, I have the numbers on it in just a minute. But according to the 2017 tax law, couples with $22 million can actually pass on their assets without facing any taxes, or the estate tax specifically. But anything above that would be taxed at 40%.
Really, you're gonna have more than $22 million in assets that you're gonna pass on to your kids?
You're not.
And by the way, the first $22 million you can pass on with no taxes at all. And you're worried about the 22nd millionth dollar being taxed at 40%. Okay, all right. You'll see in the numbers here. Then you're among the very richest people in the country and in the world.
And by the way, even if you think you're principled and you think, look, it might not affect me, but I think it's wrong because it's double taxation. You hear that argument quite a bit. But it's not double taxation because you didn't earn that money. The people receiving that money after a family member's death didn't earn it themselves. That is new income to them, and so it should be taxed. And right now, as it stands, $22 million of it will not be taxed. Anything above it will be taxed at 40%. Mitch McConnell and the greedy Republican cronies that he's in cahoots with want to make sure that it's not taxed at all, regardless of how much you inherit.
So the Washington Post had very good facts in their column written by Jeff Stein, so I don't want to, I'm not bashing them, but unfortunately they made the same mistake that most of the mainstream media makes in accepting Republican framing on this. In fact, the only so-called expert they talked to was a conservative, which happens quite often. Brian Rydell, a conservative economist at Manhattan Institute, framed it as, well, conservatives don't want double taxation, whereas progressives think it's a moral issue and that the rich need to be taxed to bring in more federal revenue and level the economic playing field. Now, those two arguments from the progressives are true, but they very importantly left out the third argument, which Anna just told you. And that makes it seem like, well, oh wait, it's either this or that. It's not. It's those economic arguments, those moral arguments, plus it's just not true that it's double taxation. So the Republicans actually have no leg to stand on. Remember, Conrad Hilton made the money and he already paid taxes on it. Paris Hilton receives the money and she never paid taxes on it. It is not double taxation.
Exactly. So now let's just compare what the estate tax is today versus what it was right before the 2017 tax cuts for the rich. So as I mentioned, right now $22 million can be passed on with no taxes. Before the 2017 GOP tax law, an individual could pass on up to $5.45 million without paying the estate tax, which would then take a cut of up to 40% from wealth above that threshold. And by the way, I just want to make a quick clarification on something I said earlier. So the current estate tax doesn't indicate that you would get taxed at 40% for every dollar above 22 million. It's a progressive tax. So the more you inherit, the more you would pay in taxes percentage-wise for every dollar over the 22 million. Okay, so I just want to make sure you know that. Also, how many people will this affect? About 1,700 families are expected to actually pay the tax annually.
There are 330 million people in the country, and 1,700 families pay the tax. Wow, it could happen to you. Okay, by the way, if it happens to you, congratulations. That means you have a ton of money.
Yeah.
And you just received $22 million without any taxes.
Yeah.
If you had to work for that 22 million, you actually would have paid a lot of taxes. But in this case, it's a gift. You didn't even have to work for it, and you don't get taxed on it. You only get taxed past $22 million.
You guys, like the way taxes work in this country, like hardworking middle class and working class people get taxed at a higher percentage than the wealthiest people in the country. Just let that sink in for a second. Like, that's insane, and it affects us the most.
And then they make it seem like it's a moral, principled argument. Well, you might not make that much money, but it is so wrong to take that money from Paris Hilton when she didn't work a day in her life to earn it. No, and by the way, there are a lot of different ways that you tax wealth, including property taxes. So if you're middle class, you pay property taxes. Well, that's not quite along those same lines. You could argue that's double taxation, not quite fair, right? But they don't make that argument because that affects the middle class more, okay? And that's more regressive taxes. But when it comes to the super rich, all of a sudden Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are like, wait a minute, get out of the way, get out of the way. I gotta help the 1,700 richest people in the country. And by the way, not them, but their kids and grandkids who are getting the money for free.
Exactly.
Okay, last thing on this, more context, guys. The estate tax used to be, it's at 40% above 22 now. It used to be 77%. And again, when we had the best economic times in American history. And back then, now to be fair, that was a long time ago, 1942 to 1976. So it's a long stretch of time. And yes, when we were the most prosperous in this country, it started at 40,000. Now it starts at 22 million.
It's insane.
Okay, and even recently, all the way up until 2010, it started at $1 million. To be fair to Apples and Apples, it started at $1 million. Now they're trying to get it to 11 million. It's 22 million for the couples.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is a huge exemption for the rich, pushed by Republicans over and over and over again. And the rate used to be 50% until, again, about a decade ago, and now it's 40%. And this is how they rigged the system. If you wonder how we got to wealth inequality, this is how you create nobility and oligarchs. You let them hoard the money, okay, for the heirs that never worked a day in their lives for it. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.